Hi, I'm Lee Bagshaw from Simmonds Stewart, and welcome to our VC term sheet deep dive, where we look through a Series A term sheet that you might typically see if you're raising financing in Southeast Asia. If you want to download the term sheet, which is marked up and which we refer to in this video, click on the link below the video and you can download that document. We've also got a whole bunch of great resources on our website at www.simmonsstewart.com, where you can learn a little bit more about raising capital in the region. Okay, this is video 5, and I'm going to talk about the parts of the term sheet that refer to the company issuing shares in the future, or where a shareholder wants to transfer shares. And these concepts of right of first refusal and preemptive rights appear in all term sheets. So whilst they're not necessarily critical compared to some of the other issues you might consider, there's a few nuances to them that you need to consider as you go along. Okay, so the first element of this is what's called preemptive rights, which is the right that, for example, the investors will have to participate in future financing rounds. And effectively, they have a right of first refusal to maintain their equity stake in the company if you try and raise money in the future. And it's fair to say that most Series A investors will want some form of preemptive rights in the term sheet and in the final form documents. Some of the things to consider here. The first thing is that you may not want to offer preemptive rights to all of the investors, and you may want to caveat that by only offering these preemptive rights to sort of major investors, i.e. investors that are going to take significant stakes in the company. So that's one way of, if you like, limiting the impact of the preemptive rights. The other thing you might want to consider is whether the investors, by way of a majority, which may be 50 or maybe 75%, can agree to waive these preemptive rights on a future financing round. And the reason that this is worth thinking about both the material holding and the potential waiver is that the more shareholders that have the benefit of preemptive rights, the more hassle it is for you in the future if you're raising money, because you have to get waivers of preemptive rights from all of those shareholders who are not participating in the round, which is often the case. So the objective here is to try and keep the number of parties with preemptive rights to a minimum and put some qualifiers around it. The other thing that we often try and do in the term sheet is put some exemptions to the preemptive rights, and some of these are fairly obvious. For example, you must have the ability to issue shares on exercise of options under an agreed share option plan. But also, if you want to acquire other companies and issue shares as consideration to the target shareholders, that might be another area where you want to be able to move quickly and without having to seek preemptive waivers of preemptive rights from multiple shareholders. So that's restrictions on future share issues. The next thing to think about is the right of first refusal on share transfers. So this is where a shareholder in the company wants to transfer shares to a third party, and what are the restrictions around this? And the starting point is that there will always be some element of right of first refusal, and normally it will be set out that if any shareholder wants to sell shares to a third party, they have to offer them up to the other shareholders on a pro rata basis. Now, the investors may, in the first draft of the term sheet, say that they have the right to take up any shares offered for transfer, and that may be okay, because the reality is that some of your other initial shareholders may not ever be likely to acquire shares of a third party looking to sell. But always consider who have the benefit of those rights, and sometimes we would add the founders, for example, as the beneficiaries of those right of first refusal rights if the term sheet just says the investors. The other thing to consider about share transfers is whether the investors are bound by the right of first refusal. And this is important because you may not want material investors selling large chunks of equity to third parties, particularly, for example, if they sold it to a competitor of your business, for example. And sometimes venture capital investors will insist that they're not bound by a right of first refusal on share transfers, i.e. they essentially are free to transfer their shares as they please. If they insist on that, and our view is to try and push back as much as you can, and certainly impose a restriction on any transfer to a competitor. But if they insist on not being bound by a right of first refusal, then there is a compromise position which is a right of first offer, which certainly doesn't carry anything like the weight of a right of first refusal, and it's really just more of a right of negotiation, so that if an investor does want to sell its shares, it has to come to the company first and at least make the point that they want to sell, and the company and the other shareholders, or indeed the company, have the right to discuss whether they're able to offer a price which could take those shares off the investors so they don't go out of the business to a third party. Okay, so that's the end of video 5. Thanks for joining our VC term sheet deep dive again. If you want to keep up to date with further videos in the series, do make sure that you click on the link below.